What was the creepiest thing you experienced that you thought was paranormal, but was actually much scarier when you found out what really caused it? Story 1. When my friends and I initially entered college, we used to chill a lot at my friend's dad's house, who lived out in the country. Late at night, when scanning the horizon, you could see all of the stars. It wasn't like the city, but you could also see a radio tower, perhaps a few miles away. One late fall night, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, we decided to drive out to this radio tower, just out of curiosity. It was in the middle of a large field with one entrance, which happened to be opened. We entered from there and drove about a quarter mile in towards the radio tower. When we got there, we noticed underneath the radio tower a rusty beat-up car. The thing looked like it hadn't been driven in years. We pulled to the other side of the tower and just chilled for a little bit, talking about whatever and listening to music. Then one of my friends pointed towards the beat-up car. "Does it look like there's a light in there?" he said. We all stared at the car, and sure enough, emanating behind the dust-covered windows of the car was a dim light. We pretty quickly put our car in drive and started moving out of there. It was a field, though, so of course we moved relatively slow. The same friend who pointed out the light noticed that the car started moving along with us, following slowly. It didn't put on its headlights, but the light inside the car seemed to glow brighter. That was the moment that my friend, driving, screamed, "Curse it!" and hightailed it faster than I'd ever seen. We left the junk car in the dust, literally in this case, and from that day we had always referred to this story as the ghost car story. Did we really believe in ghosts? Probably not, but paranormal is better than whatever else it could have been. Come to find out, a few years later, that field was regularly being monitored by the local sheriff's office for big substance deals that apparently went down there. Had we stuck around any longer that night than we did, we could have legitimately been unalived. This was also in the era that we watched a lot of Breaking Bad, so in retrospect, it seemed to us like that could have very much been a likely outcome from that night. Luckily, we're all good, and nothing bad ever came from it for any of us. Wow. Well, I wonder if they actually ended up catching whoever was making deals down there. It doesn't seem like it. It says like that seems to be a spot where those deals happen all the time. You would think that they might spare some time to put a sheriff's car out there to kind of deter that from happening in that area, out in the country. Anyway, story 2. My mom lives in Mexico, close to the Texas border in the Gulf of Mexico. She also lived close to a military base. Where she lives, there's a lot of violence, shootouts, people hanged on the bridge with no heads, etc. So I came to visit my mom for like 3 months, and I've been to Mexico several times, so I got used to seeing the Mexican Army and Marines riding around town with big old guns and hearing crazy local stories. I also know how to get around and blend in with the locals so I won't stand out. While I was there one day, I was home alone. I went outside to feed and pet my mom's 2 cats, and it was already dark, and then, out of nowhere, I hear this really loud scream between a human and an animal. I got so absolutely scared because I thought some ghost or Urana or someone was being tortured on some cartel type stuff. I went back inside, put my earphones on, and played music so I couldn't hear the noise. The next day, I only went outside to feed the cats. During the day, I didn't hear anything. But at night, when I fed the cats, I saw the Mexican military pass in front of my mom's house. It was a routine checkup on the neighborhood, and the sounds started again, but they weren't fazed by it. At this point, I thought someone was getting tortured, and the Mexican army turned a blind eye, which is very common here. So I was even more scared. When my mom came back, I told her what happens about the really loud screaming noises. So she starts laughing and told me that at the end of the neighborhood lived a rich narco person who owned a ranch, and he had peacocks that would make the really scary sounds at night. My family still makes fun of me to this day. Funny story, peacocks are crazy sounding. I actually live right close to someone that does have peacocks. I can confirm. If I had heard the sounds that I heard at night, I'd almost start believing in ghosts too. Story 3. I knew a kid when I was 10 who lived alone with his father up a dirt road in the middle of the woods. We were pretty good friends one summer. Everyone in our area, rural as heck, we all knew each other, thought the dad was really weird. Among the younger kids, there were rumors that the dad was a monster or a zombie or something. For one, he smelled absolutely awful and had the rankest carrion breath. Also, he would stare at the kids a lot. Creepy as hell. When I was 14, I found out that my friend was not the guy's son, that the creepy guy had in fact kidnapped him when he was 7 or so and had kept him captive up in the woods, violating him repeatedly. My friend also turned 14 when I did, which apparently was too old to be appealing to the creepy dad, who promptly kidnapped another little boy from town about 70 miles away and brought him back to the cabin where he lived with my friend. He was even trying to pay another teenager I knew, a kind of lost boy with a juvenile record, to take my friend out into the woods and unalive him, so he could be alone with his new victim, who I think was 5 years old. My friend realized that the same had happened to him. He'd been brainwashed for 7 years, told that his parents didn't want him anymore, and had given him to the creepy guy to adopt. So he waited until the creep went to work, grabbed the little boy, and hitchhiked and walked about 40 miles to the nearest police station. Saved the kid from a terrible fate. Ended up going back to the family he'd been taken from 7 years before. It was in the news a lot, and a TV movie was made, etc. So the creepy, smelly old weirdo really was a freaking monster. He unalived in prison, and that was a good day. Oh man, that is just too close. I mean, what he did was just worse than being haunted by some kind of ghost who's making weird noises. That's real evil right there. Story 4. Actually, 2 days ago, my plant's water supply were full. One is basically a turkey baster with a large liter water bottle on the back end. You stab the squirty end into the soil and water is released as the soil dries up and evaporates. The other is a 5-gallon hydroponic tank. My last distinct memory of the bottle was on Thursday night because the water level was exactly 1 inch above the soil level. I avoided filling the bottle that night because if I poke it too deep and it gets near a drainage hole, the bottle drains in a matter of minutes and leaves a big puddle on the ground. When I woke up, the bottle was 100% full, and all of my other plants had been misted as the dew was still very much on the leaves still. The hydroponic tank was full as well. This would take at least 20 minutes to drain the old water, pH balance, and refill with fresh water. I live alone, and my girlfriend has a key, but doesn't really take care of plants like that, and definitely wouldn't know how to fill the water bottle without flooding the floor or drain-fill hydroponic setups. I asked her, and she hasn't touched my plants in months. I don't have a history of sleepwalking, but it's the only thing I can think of at the moment. I do have a history of extreme sleep apnea, though. If you don't already have one, you might want to invest in a CO detector. One of the symptoms of CO poisoning is short-term memory loss. One guy online some time ago kept finding Post-it notes around his place and thought someone was breaking in, but in reality it was him leaving the notes due to CO. Story 5. Didn't think this was paranormal, but definitely thought it was creepy, and ended up being more than I bargained for. When I was 13, I had a small jewelry box my mom gave me that had cushions for rings. I had 6 rings that I kept in it. Nothing of value. Think mood rings and silver rings. I was somewhat neurotic as a kid and had spent an afternoon arranging my room, and I'd put the 6 rings in a specific order. I opened the box one day and noticed that 2 of the rings were out of order. I thought someone in my family had moved them because there was zero explanation for this. I asked my family if anyone had touched them, and they all insisted no one had opened the box, but I was convinced someone had to have gone through it. My dad ended up going through our entire house checking for missing stuff, and the only missing things were an old bottle of hydrocodone from the medicine cabinet and some of my mom's gold jewelry from a bathroom drawer. Turns out there had been strings of robberies in the neighborhood where thieves had broken in, but only taken prescription substances and small gold items. None of the robberies had indications that the homes had been broken into, and things like laptops, diamond jewelry, and other valuables had been left alone. My family wouldn't have known anything was amiss aside from the fact I was so convinced something was off. To be honest, that was a pretty smart thief. Make a profit without taking enough items to rouse suspicion and leave the cops out of things for the most part. Probably never got caught. Story 6. I started firmly believing in ghosts in middle school. My freshman year of high school, I knew there was one who stood in my room by the closet, and I had enough one day and started yelling at it through my mind because I was angry that it was watching me. A sudden weight came down in my head, and I knew what had happened. It was punishment. The ghost was inside my head. For years, I kept quiet about it, knowing people would just think I was crazy or lying. In the meantime, I lost basically all emotions except for fear. The rest sank no deeper than surface level, and I stopped feeling rested after I slept. I chalked both of those things up to the ghost. Turns out I was so quick to believe in ghosts because I have OCD that tells me I'm being observed 24/7, and the idea of ghosts being the culprit fit perfectly into my interpretation of my surroundings. This obsession will likely never go away fully. My brain feeds me lies every waking moment, and all I can do is learn to overcome them. As for the weight in my head, it's still there, almost 10 years later. So far, all the doctors I've seen for it seem uninterested in helping me after basic scans and tests come back negative. If I ever find out what it really is, I'll try to remember to update. My OCD and paranormal delusions stem mostly from an unbalanced thyroid. That heaviness is in my head, too, when I'm not right. I hope you get the treatment you need. I think that's kind of scary to have this kind of reality and then realize that your own brain is manufacturing something that isn't real. I mean, it doesn't feel like you can trust yourself. You can't trust your brain. I don't know if I've ever had any kind of experience that intense as this person's. Have you? Story 7. I don't know if it fits, but this happened a few days ago on Valentine's night, February 14th. I live on the ground floor of some apartments. There was really intense knocking on my door and some neighbor's door at midnight. I looked out the peephole of my door but couldn't see anything, even when my door got knocked on again. I was honestly terrified. I couldn't see anything. After a minute or so, I heard my upstairs neighbor's door open, crying, and a phone call to 911. I went outside to check on her, and there was a woman I'd never seen before, who I learned lived next to me. Her husband had been abusing her and had just kicked her out of the apartment. It was freezing outside and she was only in her underwear. She had broken her glasses and taken her phone, wallet, and keys. It took the police 5 hours to get here. I hope she's all right. Update February 18th. She came over to borrow my phone to call a family member. She seems to regret calling the police, but still plans to leave her husband. The police didn't help her. I don't have much more to say besides that. I almost think that mother jerker should be charged with attempted unaliving. You locked her outside in the freezing cold, unable to see well, nearly naked, and unable to even get inside her car for shelter or call for help. Having her pass away of hypothermia almost seems intentional to me here. Sorry piece of trash. Story 8. When I was 12-ish something, I came home to find the bedroom lights on. If it was just my bedroom, then it wouldn't have been a problem. But my brother's room lights were also on, and we never leave those lights on. Could have been my brother or my mom, but one was in the army while the other was at work. I was a little freaked out, but I tried to tone it down by saying that I might have left them on before going out. Then I turn and see a couple of wooden spoons on top of our kitchen cabinet. I knew for a fact that I hadn't left any spoons sitting there. I also didn't recognize those 2 spoons. That's when I realized that someone had been inside our house. Long story short, I had lost my keys a few days prior and my neighbor, who was the same age as I, found them. Instead of giving it back, he kept them with himself. Days later, his mom asked him to, deliver something to my mom, but there was no one at home, so he used his keys to enter our house. He forgot his mom's wooden spoons there, and if it wasn't for this, we would never have found out that he entered our house. I think he stole money from us as well. Still doesn't explain why he had his mom's spoons with him. Story 9. There was one time when I was younger that I was home alone in mine and my mother's old townhouse. I'd been downstairs in the living room and suddenly felt uncomfortable being down there, so I decided to go to my room. I get about halfway up the stairs when I feel this horrible sense of dread and panic, and I look back and see this complete silhouette of a man, complete from head to toe, standing in the corner at the bottom of the steps. I could feel him looking at me, even though there were no eyes. I ran up the stairs and locked myself in my room until my mother got home. Wasn't until years later that I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, which explained that happening and a lot of other things I was going through, seeing and hearing. I've gotten more used to the things I've seen and heard over the years, and the medication helps immensely, but I remember that moment so clearly because it scared me so deeply. I'll never forget it. Dang, I'm so sorry you went through this. And I'm happy things cleared out, even though the outcome wasn't optimistic. My uncle has schizophrenia. On the right meds, too, now, and you helped me get the idea of what he must have been going through. Thank you. I'm glad you're a lot better now. Keep being awesome. And here we have another story of your own brain manufacturing a reality that's scaring you. To me, that's even scarier than if something actually paranormal was happening to you. Not being able to trust your own brain. Story 10. We lived in this big, beautiful farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, California. It was my first time having my own room. Mom was devastated because the landlord evicted us after a few months, saying, "We need the house back for the farmhands." There may have been more to it, but I was a little kid at the time. My uncle helped us pack everything up and asked if we left anything in the attic. Mom said she'd never been up there, but he was welcome to look. There was only one entrance, through my bedroom. When he got up there, he found my favorite Cabbage Patch doll hung by its neck from the ceiling. There were candles in a circle beneath it that had burned to wax puddles and cigarette butts on the floor. It looked like someone was conducting a seance up there with my toys. After that, Mom was totally fine with us moving out as fast as humanly possible. Wish I had a better ending for you, but we never found out who did it or why. My only clue is one night my sister claimed to see the silhouettes of a man hanging out in her doorway watching her sleep. Mom was a single parent at the time. We didn't have a father figure or visiting relatives, so who knows? Oh, that does sound creepy. Story 11. Woke up in the night to a woman's voice wailing. I live in a quiet residential total suburb, and there aren't many noises past 8 p.m. normally. I thought I was dreaming or hearing a ghost. It made my hair stand on end. To be safe, I peeked out the window and didn't see anything unusual. I was about to fall back asleep when I heard urgent, low voices. I tried to understand them, but it sounded like a guttural, surreal language. Demons? Then I heard distinctly, "Just get in the car," and a woman grunting, and some sounds of struggling from my backyard. My mind immediately jumped to, "There's a woman in danger. I need to do something." So I threw on some clothes and ran outside. In my yard was a woman writhing on the ground and a man standing above her. I yelled something along the lines of, "Get away from her, you absolute creep!" and then noticed he was wearing a police uniform. And beside him was his partner, pointing a gun at the writhing woman. The one with the gun said in a measured tone, "Ma'am, you need to get back inside your house. Stay away from the windows. Don't open that door again until morning." I noped the hell out of there and followed her directions. Still don't know what happened. I'm guessing illicit substances? Story 12. My friend lived up in these pitchy black windy hills about 20 minutes from any ambient city lights. No traffic stoplights, street lights, nothing. One night when driving up to visit him, I reached a stop sign. I looked left, no one there. Looked right, no one there. Then proceeded to make a left turn. From the time it took me to look left, then right, a man stepped into the street about 10 feet in front of my car. I immediately slammed on my brakes and he just stood there. My car lights hitting him, not moving. I slowly just drove around him and he kept facing forward as I passed. Didn't turn his head at all to look at me or make eye contact. I get to my friend's house convinced I had seen a ghost and was freaking out about it. My friend asked me to describe the man I saw. And when I did, he tells me it was a diddler that moved in down the street with the diddler's parents, after getting out of jail. Too long didn't read? A man stepped in front of my car in the middle of nowhere, thought it was a ghost, but ended up being a convicted and recently released from jail diddler. Maybe he wanted you to run over and unalive him. Do you think he had a self-unaliving streak, or was this some kind of medicated stupor? I have a feeling that it might be some kind of depression self-unaliving attempt. In prison, they will find out what you've done regardless of whether you tell them or not, and probably deservedly so, most likely absolutely deservedly so. He caught a lot of hell for it. Story 13. I was 24 and working at a startup.com. I spent a weekend at my parents' house, came back to my apartment, and went into my bedroom where I saw my bed was made. Felt my heart stutter as I stood frozen in the doorway because I never, ever made my bed. It was something I consciously refused to do. After the initial shock, I went through the apartment examining the closets, under the bed, etc. I calmed down after a while, convincing myself that I must have made the bed before I left for my parents and just forgotten about it. Deep down, I knew it wasn't true, but I couldn't think of any other explanation. I later found out it was the woman I was dating at the time who did it. She was the person who hired me. We'd been in a relationship less than a month, but she managed to somehow get a copy of my key. She used to visit my place and snoop through my things when I was gone. She also slept in my bed overnight several times when I was away for the weekend. If she hadn't made my bed, I never would have known anything was going on. That's really weird behavior. Huge red flag. Story 14. This happened to my cousin's friend living in San Francisco in the early 90s. I was just a kid, so I don't remember the exact details. Her friend lived in a typical San Francisco apartment, often coming home late from work. One night, when she was trying to sleep, she heard loud banging noises coming from upstairs, followed by sounds of washing. The washing noise went on for hours. She thought it was annoying, but completely normal. Upstairs neighbor probably couldn't sleep and decided to move some furniture and deep clean the bathroom. Next day morning, she saw her neighbor going downstairs with large black trash bags. Again, she told herself it's weird but normal, since her neighbor has been up late cleaning. A few weeks later, she learned that her upstairs neighbor had gotten into a dispute with the roommate, was unalived, and dismembered. The roommate was caught, and the police discovered large trash bags of body parts. The incident happened that night when she heard the strange noises. You have to be a special sort of messed up to methodically take a person apart and then clean like it's just another chore while casually strolling past your neighbor with trash bags of human pieces like that. Story 15. When I was 8, we were on a long holiday, staying with some friends in a town called Surat. It's in country Queensland, Australia. I was staying in their son's room, who had moved to Brisbane for university. Each night, I had the same recurring nightmare of an alien tentacle trying to grab me. After a week, I was terrified of going to sleep, but my parents kept telling me that it was okay. I was just frightened because we were staying somewhere new and that it would be okay. Well, I couldn't get to sleep. I kept watching the clock, waiting for the sun to come up and terrified of the alien. It was just after 2 a.m. when a large tentacle landed on the bed. I screamed in terror as I felt the tentacle wriggling. I jumped out of bed and kept screaming. My parents, aunt, uncle, and sister ran into the room to find me huddled in the corner screaming. Turns out it was an adult carpet python over 2 meters long, 6.5 feet. Each night it worked its way under the ceiling tile and onto the bed. I still have an Indiana Jones fear of snakes. Why'd it have to be snakes?
Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 16. I was 7 years old, home alone. My parents went for dinner at around 9 p.m. They left me in bed for me to sleep. Hours passed and still couldn't sleep. Went downstairs to get some milk and cookies to watch TV in my parents' bedroom. While I was getting snacks, I felt like someone grabbed my shoulder hard. I was so scared I couldn't even turn around to check who did it. I stayed there frozen for at least 1 minute straight. I had the courage to run and went to my parents' bedroom. I locked myself in there and didn't get out until my parents came home. It was 3 a.m. and heard my parents' car park outside the window. I was never so happy for them to come home. As soon as my parents get in the house, my mom screamed and called 911. The thing I thought was a ghost that grabbed me was actually a substance addict who secretly lived in our basement and that night thought nobody was home, so went to grab some snacks from the fridge too and confused my shoulder with the fridge's door and then passed out. Still freaks me out to this day. Story 17. I have a little dog that barks at everything. I was watching a scary movie at home alone one night, and my dog ran to the back door and started barking like crazy. Once I got over the initial fear of ghosts, I realized that she probably needed to pee. I let her out and she ran straight to a bush in the corner. She keeps barking at the bush, so I got out to see what it was, thinking a cat or a squirrel. There's nothing there, so I pick her up and take her inside. When I turned to walk, I saw some kind of shadow, so definitely ghost now, and I run. I lock myself in my room while my dog continues to bark at the window, but looking out, there's nothing there. The next day, a cop shows up at my door. A woman next door got accosted in her backyard the night before, and the house on the other side was broken into while the people were asleep. The guy didn't take anything, he was just walking around when someone found him. They think the guy used my backyard to get to the two houses. Story 18. About 7 years ago, my family rented a one-story house. It was originally one bigger house that was split off into two, and there was another family that lived in the other part that we didn't really talk with. During the night, I would hear what sounded like knocks above the ceiling, but any entrance to the small crawl space between the ceiling and the roof was patched up when the house was divided. For a while, I thought there was a ghost who lived in the attic, and I would have trouble going to sleep without a light on. As we moved out, I heard through the grapevine that the neighbor's kid was caught spying on the new people that moved in. Turns out that he had broken a hole in the ceiling of his closet to get into the crawl space and had been looking through holes that he had bored in the ceiling overlooking the other part of the house. The noises I heard was him moving around on his arms and knees up there. Leaving your light on ironically makes you easier to spy on. Story 19. I had a blind dog growing up, and she barked at things that were there, and things that weren't. One night, around midnight, she woke up my mom and I, my dad's too heavy of a sleeper, by barking at the wall next to the back door. I woke up, but I was maybe 9, so I went right back to sleep. My mom got up and ushered her back to bed. That same night, an arsonist hit my neighborhood. He set fire to a luckily vacant house for sale and burned it to the ground. Following his footsteps in the snow, he then passed between my bedroom and our garage and nearly lit our garage. Then our dog and my mom woke up, and we think that scared him away. And he went across the street and burned my neighbor's garage instead. Then he stood in their front yard and watched it burn. He walked out onto the street, and they lost his footsteps. They never caught him. R.I.P., Oreo. I miss you. You were a very good pup. Love you. Be good. Something fricky. Oreo. Story 20. I'm not sure this fits because I didn't think it was paranormal. I just thought my mental state was deteriorating severely. Basically, I became super isolated and depressed, was suffering from a health condition that doctors in the UK either never heard of or didn't know how to treat, despite me having notes from my doctors back home. So yeah, I was indoors a lot and feeling worse every day. I started noticing something in the corner of my vision. Strange movement, but only on my left side. I could never catch whatever it was. It just looked like a dark, unfocused blob. This went on for weeks. I eventually chalked it up to being tired. But then I thought my entire health was going south, so that had to be yet another symptom. One morning, I woke up facing the same side of that room when I noticed the blob again. It came closer and closer from another corner of the room and stopped in the corner I was facing. It was a mouse. Tiny little thing. Deity, dang it. Story 21. As a young kid, I had nightmares of waking up to see my mother hovering over my bed by the window. She just blankly stared down at me and my sister. I'd get so scared, yelling, "Mom! Mom!" and she never responded. I knew it was not my mom. When I was older, I told my aunt about it, and she told me they weren't dreams. It was real. My mom would go into our rooms randomly to check on us. She had serious mental health issues that got worse over the years. Occasionally, she would have episodes of anxiety of something happening to us and guard us at night. Due to the traumatic passing of her first child, it apparently triggered obsessive anxiety when we were younger. I now know the whole messed up backstory and can sympathize with why it would make any parent get to that mental state, but I still shudder when I think of that blank-faced stare. I still tend to associate the nightmare mom as not being my mom. That's kind of sad, actually. Story 22. A little after I graduated high school, some friends and I were hanging out at a local park after dark. Decided to go walk through the woods for the spookiness of it. About 20 minutes in, we hear this loud screaming from behind us and barely see this dark figure rushing towards us at what we would describe as supernatural speed. So we hauled butt and didn't stop until we were out of the wooded area and didn't see it. A couple of friends claimed it appeared to be floating towards us as it howled like a banshee. We later found out that area of the woods is popular for homeless people to hang out in and shoot up. So instead of some sort of evil wood spirit, it was most likely a homeless horse addict running at us at full speed and screaming. Probably not horse. They mainly just lie on the ground and space out. I'm guessing it was probably Walter White crystals. Story 23. Few years ago, I was 15. I was lying down in bed, chilling, minding my business about 9 p.m. I heard a small rocket in the backyard, thinking that it was my dad. Few moments later, my dad opened my door and asked, "Hey, were you outside?" I was like, "No, I thought it was you." So we both go and check the backyard. There was this woman sitting on our fence, turned her head, and saw us with her hair down. Then jumped off and started running around the backyard grass for no reason. I was pooping myself, and my dad threatened that he'll call the cops. Few seconds later, she rapidly climbed the fence to the neighbor's house. We went to go to the neighbor's house, but acted weird and said he doesn't know anything. We decided it was some really addicted-up person who was off their nut. Story 24. For several months during my senior year of high school and all through the summer before I left for college, I kept hearing noises from the attic above my bedroom. I would only hear it at night, and I told my parents and brothers that it sounded like someone walking in the attic and dragging a chain on the ground. My dad even had me go to sleep on the couch one night so he could sleep in my room to try to hear it. My older brother went up into the attic. Nothing. I left for college and didn't really think much of it. When I returned from my first visit home, my dad revealed he'd found a slow leak in one of the pipes that rotted a hole in the ceiling above my bed. The drip of water had been ricocheting around the pipes, sounding like chains dragging. Story 25. I stayed up late one night and went to bed around 3 in the morning. My room was pitch black and I hopped into bed to get comfortable. All of a sudden, it felt like something jumped into bed with me. I was in disbelief. I felt around and didn't feel anything. Then I felt it again, and this time, I freaked the hell out. I hopped out of bed and turned the light on. There was nothing in my room. So I told the demons to get stuffed and leave me alone. I browsed online until I fell asleep. I found out the next morning that it was an earthquake, which is extremely rare to happen where I live. I'm going to guess you live in Kansas because this same thing happened to me recently. Except I told Satan himself to take off. Story 26. My uncle bought an old house, 150-ish years old, as a fix-up project. If you went up the stairs, you had an option to turn right or left. Left led to a series of bedrooms, and right had a landing and one bedroom past it. If you took the dog upstairs, she would cry and run away if you tried to take her right. My cousin insisted that the bedroom to the right was haunted, thus the frightened dog. Later, we worked on the house, and found that the landing to the right was structurally unsafe. To this day, we wonder, did the dog know the landing was unsafe somehow? Or was there something more sinister at play? Creaking wood gives off a lot of infrasound. It's possible the dog could hear the structural weakness. Story 27. So sometimes I get sleep paralysis. I've accepted that if I wake up and weird things are happening, I should just ignore them. Well, one time I woke up in the middle of the night to two male voices arguing. Nothing unusual. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep when I heard my dog start barking and growling, and then heard my parents talking in concerned voices. I realized it was not sleep paralysis at all, and got up to find a very drunk father and son duo arguing outside our front window. Started swearing at us when my dad yelled at them to move along. Cops were called. Another time, same situation, only it was a vole tunneling into my room very noisily and eating through the drywall. Story 28. When I was with my ex, we lived with his parents for a bit in a kind of granny flat above their garage. I'd often take naps through the day while he was at work, and stuff would inexplicably move around or go missing while I was asleep. Never happened when he was home or when I was awake. I was convinced the place was haunted and whatever spirit it was had it out for me. Turns out his dad was coming in and doing this, with the intention of making it look like I was nuts so I would be discredited when I spoke out against his abusive butt son. Story 29. About 3 years ago, while laying in a bed, I felt a presence. Then I felt a hand pressing forcefully on the back of my head. I heard a voice telling me to choose between this life and the next. Over the course of the next few months, I felt, heard, and understood many things not of this world. After finally breaking down and having enough, I attempted to end my life. Only after did I find out that I had a non-functioning thyroid, probably for a while, and so many lab abnormalities. It all triggered a state of psychosis that led me to almost perishing. Story 30. A previous owner had perished in one of my childhood homes. Strange things happened there that drove us and my dog absolutely nuts. But it became exceptionally creepy when my sister, who was sleeping in the basement apartment, began insisting that somebody was watching her at night. We later found an old camera hidden in the walls and learned that said previous owner was arrested for spying on the girl who rented his basement apartment. I really don't understand how we just know when we're being watched. It's a weird feeling, but I'm confused to how we know. Story 31. Whole family in the camp trailer at a sweet little place with full hookups. Kids were asleep. It was late. Campground was totally quiet. A flash of light no bigger than your thumb lit the whole trailer up in a blue smoke, odd-smelling flash. Wife and I were certain it was a Ghostbusters type of weird stuff. I went outside. Nothing but that odor, but total darkness. Apparently, light struck a power transformer 3 miles away that finally grounded out right next to our trailer, and overnight the power pole simply smoldered away from the center out. Story 32. I had a friend who was staying at a ski lodge, and he went outside at night to smoke a cigarette. While he was out there, he said it seemed like an invisible monster was coming right at him. He heard it stomping, even smelled it, felt its breath as it charged him, and then it passed through him, and it was gone. Turns out, it was a grizzly bear stomping its way around the floor directly underneath where he was. So always stay on the second floor at a ski lodge. Got it. Story 33. My dad lives like next door to the entrance to the highway. His neighbor kept complaining that she had raccoons because she kept hearing noise coming from under her back porch. It wasn't raccoons. It was the 3 hobos that stood near the highway asking for money. They would wait until they would see her lights go off and then make their way over. The scary part is that she has dogs and seems like they didn't notice either because the hobos had mattresses underneath there and clearly had been there for a while. Story 34. Not sure if this really counts, but about 5 years ago, I got a phone call from my brother, and he just kept mumbling into the phone. He kept muttering random words, and because I was younger, stupid me thought he was possessed or something, but he had just had a seizure and had just woken up. My brother gets really woozy and panicky after he has a seizure. Scared the living hell out of me. I like how your first assumption was that he was possessed. Story 35. Towards my second half of high school, everything started feeling like it was all going downhill. It felt like to me there was some unseen outside force making my life heck. Turns out that I actually have type 1 diabetes, and in that time of my second half of high school was when I was experiencing the symptoms of the condition. Story 36. Keep losing my underwears. Few months passed, finally found them in pubescent cousin's desk drawer. Yikes.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.